A collective hiss sounded from the changelings encircling the princess. Caramel squinted as dozens of flashes went off at once, leaving a crowd of earth ponies, pegasi, and unicorns charging at the princess. He tried to call out to them to stop, but his voice was lost in the chorus of angry shouts and snarls. Luna had more success, though.
"Stand back, you fools!"
she roared. Caramel suddenly found himself lying on his back with several other fake ponies piled on top of him. His ears were ringing, and it was difficult to tell which way was up or down. The others recovered more quickly, but he wasn't too bothered with that. He shut his eyes and waited for the bout of dizziness to end. When he finally got up, he had to duck back down almost immediately to avoid getting smacked in the face by a flying earth pony. Princess Luna was swatting everyone like flies, using hooves, magic, and even the bodies of other changelings. He winced when he saw her grab an unfortunate fellow by the tail with magic and swing him around like a flail. It was a ridiculously one-sided fight.
Why isn't Chrysalis doing anything?
He glanced around, but the queen was nowhere in sight. Then he spotted her slinking in the shadows behind the very busy princess. A part of him wanted to call out and warn her, but at the same time, he couldn't help thinking that Chrysalis's trust in him was strained enough already. But if he didn't, then the princess might start regarding him as an enemy.
Oh, heck, this is so messed up.
Princess Luna shrieked when a bolt of green magic struck her in the side. She reeled from the blast, disoriented, and then took another hit squarely in the chest. This time, she was sent flying and crashed into a pillar, narrowly missing a couple of pods that were hanging nearby. She slumped to the ground, and he saw cracks in the pillar where she'd struck it. Then, Caramel gaped when he saw Princess Celestia striding over to the fallen princess.
I am very disappointed in you, sister. Does the throne mean so much to you that you would attack our subjects just to get what you want?
Celestia gestured at the injured ponies nearby, shook her head gravely, and added,
How could you betray them? How could you betray me?
Princess Luna's expression shifted to one of fear, and she tried to scramble away from the white alicorn. But it was only for a moment, and the fear quickly gave way to outrage.
You dare!
Words seemed to fail her. Chrysalis kept up the act and sternly replied,
That's enough, Luna. Come quietly.
Changelings advanced on Luna, this time disguised as royal guards, but they had barely laid a hoof on her before she surged to all fours and whirled around, forcing them back with the ripple of air created by her outstretched wings. Before they could recover, she shot a bolt of blue lightning straight at Chrysalis, who just managed to deflect it in time with a burst of green flame. Chrysalis shed her disguise and shouted at everyone,
"Get out of the way! Move the pods elsewhere!"
The warriors retreated to watch from a safer distance, whilst the others moved quickly to detach pods and haul them off. At least those that weren't too close to the angry alicorn. Luna tried to stop them from moving the captives, but Chrysalis kept her distracted by repeatedly blasting her with magic. Eventually, the princess focused entirely on the queen, and they ended up facing off in the middle of the chamber with cracked stone and scorch marks everywhere. Now that the princess had chosen to focus on dealing with the biggest threat around, her attacks were relentless. She kept shooting lightning bolts at Chrysalis, who was forced to deflect them each time and risk hitting someone. Caramel had to dodge a stray bolt twice, and soon everyone was taking cover behind something solid. At one point, Chrysalis managed to envelop Luna in her magic, but after briefly flailing, the alicorn shattered the green aura and resumed her attack. Some warriors tried to help Chrysalis, but it was soon clear from the way Luna picked them off that they could do little against her. But after some time, Caramel noticed that Luna was slowing down, and he saw Chrysalis sporting a small grin. She was letting the princess tire herself. When the alicorn paused for breath, the queen struck back by charging and ramming into her. Luna failed utterly at blocking the attack, having apparently not been expecting a physical assault. She stumbled, and Chrysalis slung globs of resin at her wings. They clung to the feathers, and when Luna tried to shake them off, the movement only helped it spread and stick onto the rest of her coat. Caramel sensed Luna's disgust and distress, and Chrysalis took the opportunity to press her attack. She struck at the princess with bucks, swipes, and the occasional slug of resin. With every hit Luna took, she became more ensnared and less able to fight back. She wasn't bleeding, but her coat had many streaks and dirt marks on it where she'd been struck, and her movements were growing sluggish. A particularly vicious buck from the queen made her stumble to the ground. All the while, Chrysalis was buzzing her wings, and Caramel realized that his glands were oozing. A quick glance around told him that the same was happening to the others.
More pheromones.
Having fun?
Chrysalis mocked, towering over the prone alicorn. Princess Luna's horn crackled with lightning in response, but the queen quickly swatted it with a hoof, causing the spell to fizzle out. Chrysalis chuckled derisively and then cast a spell that he didn't recognize, but its effect soon became obvious. He felt a weird sensation in his legs and gasped when globules of resin floated out of the holes, enveloped in little green auras of their own. He watched in morbid fascination as hundreds of similar globs of the stuff flew from everyone's pores and smacked into Princess Luna. Before long, she was covered in green gunk, but Chrysalis kept them coming until her entire head was engulfed. Luna thrashed and screamed, creating bubbles in the sticky fluid, but the queen continued to smother her in more and more of the stuff.
Just breathe,
Chrysalis cooed softly.
That's a good pony.
The mass of fluid around the princess had grown until it was about the size of one of the pods, and Chrysalis was keeping all of it in place with her magic. From what he could see, the princess was practically floating in the stuff already. Her chest expanded, and Caramel saw some of the bubbles go back into her mouth. She squirmed and coughed, eyes bulging in shock and desperation.
I'm watching somepony drown.
He knew that he should do something, but he couldn't think of anything, and he was frightened by the sight. It felt like it had taken an obscenely long time, but Luna eventually slowed in her struggling, and her eyes rolled back and closed.
That's right. Go to sleep, little pony,
Chrysalis murmured. A tendril of magic flowed from her horn and swirled around the mass of fluid, shaping it into a cylindrical form. When she ended the spell, the princess was encased in a freshly hardened pod, and she casually shaped a stalk from one of its ends and stuck it to the ceiling. Caramel was at a loss for words. Now he had seen the queen defeat both of the princesses.
Clean up this mess,
Chrysalis ordered.
I have prisoners to interrogate.
She shot a disapproving scowl at Caramel, pointed a hoof at him, and added,
As for you, I'm very curious about how she knew where to find us.
I didn't tell her,
he blurted.
Is that so? She did not seem very surprised to see you like this. I'm sure that you were somehow involved, even if it's not as much as I'm inclined to believe.
He averted his eyes.
I've been seeing her in my dreams.
The queen narrowed her eyes.
Interesting. Did she speak to you? And what was it about?
Yeah. She said she was looking for me, but she couldn't understand what I was saying. I didn't know.
Caramel stopped when Chrysalis turned her head sharply. As he followed her gaze, he became aware of a low hissing noise, and he stiffened when his eyes fell on Princess Luna's pod. Smoke was coming off from its blistering, cracking surface, making it difficult for him to make out what was going on inside. But judging by the black swirls in the fluid, it wasn't anything pleasant.
We'll talk later,
Chrysalis said distractedly. The pod split open with a sickly gurgle, releasing all of its contents at once. What came out was mostly steaming green slop and a dark figure that was curled up in a fetal position. She rose unsteadily after hitting the ground and coughed the gunk out of her lungs as the fluid on her coat evaporated into clouds of steam. Caramel took a step backward. It was Nightmare Moon. Then, the dark alicorn leveled a steely glare at Chrysalis, and he was forced to reconsider. Though she had the black coat and the starry purple-blue mane of the Mare in the Moon, her eyes still had the same color and round pupils as Princess Luna. She was also wearing her normal breastplate instead of Nightmare Moon's armor. That didn't do much to make her look less terrifying, though. She had grown as tall as Chrysalis, and her eyes were glowing with menace.
Okay, so maybe you can do a little better than your sister.
Chrysalis conceded.
No more games. The fun ends here.
Luna growled. He was struck by an urge to flee when he heard her reverberating, dragon-like voice, but he was getting rather used to that sort of thing, so he was just able to stop himself after retreating a short distance.
Fine, get out of my home!
Chrysalis fired a blast of magic at the dark alicorn, but she managed to counter it with a bolt of purple lightning. The two created a crackling ball of green and purple energy when they met, which promptly exploded and shook the chamber. At the same time, Caramel heard a frightened chirp from somewhere above, and he jumped in surprise when something fell on his back.
Yikes!
He bucked out in panic when it clung tight, squeezing his wings. He turned to get a look, ready to zap it off with magic if necessary, and if...
Oh.
Caramel blinked. Might blinked back, and then pointed a hoof upwards and said,
It was her idea.
Caramel looked up and felt his jaw drop when he saw another nymph clinging to the ceiling.
Hey, it wasn't just my idea.
Pith retorted indignantly.
Stickle said,
Stickle?
Caramel felt like hyperventilating.
How many of you came here?
If either nymph gave an answer, it was drowned out by the sound of another explosion. He reeled from the blast and had to shield his eyes when he saw two thick beams of energy from the horns of the two combatants colliding in the middle of the chamber. One was a fiery green, the other was a crackling purplish blue. The queen and princess were both standing their ground, glaring daggers as they attempted to blast the other away. Some of the warriors, those who hadn't already fled after hearing Luna's voice, tried to surround her once more, but a heavy stomp that cracked the floor and a sideways glance from her made them stop in their tracks.
Don't!
Was all Nightmare Luna said. Chrysalis herself was starting to show signs of strain. Her ears were slightly laid back, and he could see the beginnings of a tremble going through her limbs.
Stay back, all of you!
She commanded.
I'll take care of this brat!
Her voice didn't sound as confident as her words might have suggested, though.
Speaking of brat,
Caramel still had a nymph clinging to his back.
let's get out of here. It's not safe.
He said.
but
Shush! We're leaving.
He snapped at Might. Pointing a hoof at Pith, he added,
Get back to the hatchery and stay there. That's an order, both of you.
Might leaped off his back just as Pith scuttled off upside down, and Caramel was left feeling annoyed that he probably should have first asked them where Stickle was, or if there were any of the other nymphs sneaking around.
Honestly, they're getting almost as bad as the crazy crusaders.
As he skirted the perimeter of the two powerful fighters, he noted that their colliding streams of magic were heating up the chamber considerably. There was even a warm draft coming off from the point of collision.
This can't end well.
The last time this sort of thing happened, his horn had exploded, and Chrysalis had probably been holding back on him. But now that she was up against one of the princesses, she was probably giving everything she had, and by the time one of them lost, the result was probably going to be spectacularly catastrophic.
There you are.
He spotted a small figure lurking in the shadows behind a cluster of stalactites that was practically on the opposite side of the chamber. He broke into a gallop and dashed past warriors who were transfixed by the sight of their queen dueling with an alicorn. Some changelings were running about as well, either dragging pods to safety or, he hoped, hustling other nymphs playing truant back to the hatchery. He didn't dare call out to Stickle for fear of making him leave that spot because it was relatively sheltered should there be another explosion. Caramel stole a glance at the fight and saw that Chrysalis wasn't faring so well. She was shaking and yielding ground. It was the first time he'd seen her grit her teeth, and her beam of energy was faltering and giving way to Luna's.
Not good.
He put on a burst of speed, clambered up a rock column, and dashed upside down to Stickle's hideout.
Come on, let's get out of here. It's dangerous.
He urged. At that moment, he heard a shriek from Chrysalis.
Children, help me!
He stiffened. The Queen's voice was filled with agony and overwhelming need, and he was too stunned by the amount of desperation behind the compulsion to resist. He dug into his reserves of magic and sent it forth to her, despite the stinging tingle it brought to his still recovering horn. The others were doing the same, creating a swirling web of magical tendrils that converged on Chrysalis, who appeared very close to kneeling at that point. But it all changed when she began siphoning power from all of them. It wasn't a gentle transaction like sharing love to feed others. It was desperate and ravenous. Caramel felt his reserves draining at an alarming rate. After a moment of it, Chrysalis was standing tall and proud once more, and her stream of magic had strengthened to a blazing beam of fiery wrath. Nightmare Luna's eyes widened in shock as her magic was rapidly driven back, and it was her turn to grimace when the green energy came rushing to her end. She braced herself, and the point of collision halted for a moment, just a couple of tail lengths from her horn. Then, Caramel saw a blinding flash of green, followed by a thunderclap and the sound of crumbling rock. The drain on his magic stopped abruptly, and when his vision had cleared, he saw Chrysalis standing alone in the middle of the chamber, panting and bowed over with fatigue. Smoke and dust clouded the place where her opponent had once been standing, and green embers were floating in the air.
She's gone?
Caramel felt empty inside. Princess Luna had been beaten twice. But then the smoke cleared a little, revealing Nightmare Luna still standing in place. She was staring at Chrysalis in surprise, though he could not tell whether it was because she couldn't believe her magic had been outmatched or that she was still on her hooves.
Horse apples.
What was the princess made of to be able to stand up to a blast like that? He was starting to think that maybe she was secretly a dragon or something. Then, the smoke cleared a little more, and he saw a gaping hole in the dark alicorn's chest, just below her warped, smoldering breastplate. It went right through her. The other opening was between her wings. An impact crater was visible on the wall behind her. Chrysalis's jaw dropped, and Caramel felt his blood run cold. But even more unnerving was the fact that the wound was filled with billowing purple mist instead of the more gruesome stuff that one would have expected. The mist flowed together as they watched, pulling the edges closer together like inky water. Within seconds, there was no trace of the damage.
Okay. Probably not a dragon.
Nightmare Luna grasped her mangled breastplate with magic and bent it back into shape, eliciting metallic groans from it. When she had reworked it so that the edge no longer bit into her chest, she grinned wolfishly.
Just a flesh wound.
Oh, cack.
Chrysalis muttered. The princess lunged forward, nimbly dodging a bolt of magic. Chrysalis cried out, and several warriors rushed in to answer her call, charging straight at Luna. She grabbed one with magic and flung him aside, then grunted when a magical blast struck her on the cheek. She stalled, and the other warriors leaped onto her and began slathering her with resin. Blue smoke jetted from her nostrils when she snorted in disgust, and Caramel blinked in surprise when she dissolved into starry, purple-blue mist and whirled around like a miniature, sideways tornado, dragging along several of the changelings who had failed to retreat quickly enough at her sudden transformation. They were flung out like stones as she surged and corkscrewed towards Chrysalis. This time, the queen was genuinely out of sorts. Her emotional barriers were down, and Caramel could actually taste her fear. She fired more magic at the mist, but they were relatively weak and poorly aimed. In any case, they passed harmlessly through Luna when they were on target. When she was only a couple of strides away, Chrysalis conjured a wall of green fire that elicited an angry hiss from the purple mist. But a second later, the mist coalesced back into Nightmare Luna. She burst through the wall of fire unscathed, chest fully expanded with a deep breath, and unleashed an explosive roar upon Chrysalis. It was like a cannon blast. The shockwave of sound staggered Caramel and caused dust and bits of debris to rain from the ceiling. A wave of air laden with dust radiated from the shout's point of impact, and Chrysalis, being smack in the middle of it, was pummeled into a kneeling position. Unsatisfied, Luna leaped into the air and blasted her with another roar from above. The queen's legs buckled, and she ended up sprawled on the ground, utterly spent. She was bleeding in several places where her carapace had cracked. Her ears flattened and her pupils shrank to pinpricks as Nightmare Luna landed nearby and advanced on her. Seeing the queen cowed like that stirred something in Caramel. It reminded him of the nightmare when he entered the subconscious of Luna's guard, when he thought that she was going to squash him like a grape. He released his grip on the ceiling, dropped to the floor, and shouted as he galloped towards the dark alicorn,
That's enough!
Nightmare Luna either didn't hear him or was ignoring him. Her horn was crackling with lightning, which wasn't a good sign. The queen was beaten. There was no need for further violence, and he had no idea if it really was Luna or Nightmare Moon with a slightly different look. Whatever the case, she looked like she was keen on finishing off Chrysalis, and that was something he couldn't allow. But before he could reach them, something small dropped from the ceiling and landed between the queen and the princess, then fired a green spark that exploded in Luna's face. She grunted and rubbed her watering eyes as her spell fizzled out, then glared down at the nymph standing protectively before Chrysalis. Stickle bared his fangs and hissed angrily at her. She lifted a hoof, ready to swat him aside, and Caramel lunged in to interpose with his foreleg. It was enough to stop her, but only because she was surprised by the move and had paused of her own accord. He had no doubt that she could have broken his leg if she'd meant to go ahead with her attack.
Your Highness! Please.
She glared at him, but didn't lower her hoof. A second set of pounding hooves became audible, and Luna spread a wing in anticipation of the newcomer approaching from behind her. Caramel tensed as a panting sassaflash galloped into view, skidding to a halt before she got within striking range of the dark alicorn. She was wreathed in green flame for a second and changed into her pony form, drawing a suspicious glare from Luna.
Your Highness,
Sash panted.
My name is Sassaflash. I was granted citizenship in Ponyville when I became of age. I was there when you visited on Nightmare Night. As one of your subjects, I beg of you, please don't hurt my mother.
Uncertainty flashed across Luna's features for a moment, but her coldness quickly returned.
Stay out of this, she growled.
You were wrong, Caramel. Nightmare Moon really is a monster.
Stickle piped up in Equestrian. Luna's eyes widened. She looked at the nymph, turned to Caramel, then slowly lowered her hoof.
Get away from her, all of you.
All eyes turned to Chrysalis. She waved a hoof at him impatiently, and he moved aside so she could have a clear view of Nightmare Luna. The queen had regained her composure, and her emotions were guarded once more.
I yield,
she declared solemnly to Luna. Her gaze was fearless, but it was clear that it was due to resignation rather than confidence. She had no further tricks up her sleeve.
You will have your guards and subjects returned. All of them. All I ask is that you spare my children and let them go.
The princess settled into a more relaxed stance, apparently deep in thought. Caramel noted that she was gazing at Stickle, but her eyes were unfocused, and she seemed to be missing the fact that the nymph was staring back defiantly at her.
Nay, children, Wait.
He heard her whisper, almost imperceptibly. Then, Luna sighed deeply, and the dark color of her coat dissolved into black smoke that drifted up and disappeared into thin air. She shrank to her regular size, then folded her wings and regarded them gravely.
Apologies. I should not have allowed passion to consume me so.
Then, to Chrysalis, she said,
How soon will you return my guards and free my subjects?
Immediately.
Chrysalis barked out some orders to the others present, then settled into a more dignified posture on the ground.
I will have the pods brought to the surface. After that, if you let my children go, you may deal with me as you see fit. I will not struggle.
Mother!
Sash cried, but wilted when Chrysalis gave her a stern look.
Fear not,
Luna interjected.
I tire of violence. I have no inclination to cause further harm to your kind, and I do not intend to take prisoners. Once my guards arrive, I will take Caramel to the surface to have a few words with him. Then, when all is in readiness, we will leave you in peace.
Wait a minute. Whose side is she supposed to be on now?
Stickle asked in confusion. Caramel sighed and drew him close with a hoof.
I don't know, but I'm pretty sure she's not against us for now.
They waited for the next few minutes in silence. Princess Luna sat passively on her haunches and watched as Buildercast went about shoring up the points where the battle had damaged the supporting structures of the cavern. Caramel sat next to Sash, who had reverted to changeling form, but he could not find much to say, even though there was the possibility of separation if the princess declared it so. Being close to her was all that mattered to him for now.
You're Princess Luna. You fought Discord, right?
Caramel sat up straighter and turned to find the princess eyeing a pair of nymphs by her side.
Might and Pith came back. Why am I not surprised? Yes, I did,
Luna answered.
He was a bad guy, wasn't he?
Pith continued.
Indeed he was.
So that makes you the good guy, right?
Might asked. Luna tilted her head.
I suppose so.
So why were you fighting us?
Stickle said as he skittered over to them. Princess Luna opened her mouth to answer, but the words didn't come. Her eyes became unfocused again, as if she was remembering something unpleasant. Or maybe she just didn't want or know how to explain to them that changelings and ponies were supposed to be enemies.
That's enough. Do not pester her.
Chrysalis chided the nymphs.
Go back to the hatchery before I decide to implement spanking in the hive.
The three of them glanced at Luna hopefully, but when she continued to stare at them in surprise, they quickly retreated without another word. An awkward silence ensued, but they were soon spared the task of breaking it when metallic clinking became audible. Up from one of the tunnels came the two bat ponies, shackled and collared, escorted by 3 changelings each. Although pretty battered up from their encounter with the Queen, their grim demeanors changed to relief when they saw Luna waiting serenely.
Your guards, as promised,
Chrysalis said as she levitated a key out of one of her leg holes. Once she had unlocked their bonds, she added,
The rest of the pods are being brought to the surface right now. They will be ready soon.
Luna whispered something to her guards as they returned to her sides, then stood up and turned to Chrysalis.
Thank you,
she said.
But before I go, I would have words with one of my subjects.
She turned to him and beckoned him over. Caramel noted that she had used the word subject very hesitantly, but he decided that there were bigger things to worry about. He rose and took a step forward, but turned back to look at Chrysalis for approval. She nodded curtly, and he trotted over to the princess. After a moment of hesitation, he bowed before her. Princess Luna's horn glowed, and he felt a tingle run over his body.
Wait, what are you doing?
Sash cried.
Worry not. I am merely teleporting to the surface for some privacy. Caramel will not be harmed.
Sash ran over, but skidded to a halt when both of Luna's guards blocked her way with outstretched wings. She scowled at them and added,
I'm coming with him.
The blue alicorn frowned, then regarded Caramel with a slightly raised eyebrow.
She's my special somepony and the reason I came here. I'm pretty sure she can listen to whatever you have to say to me, he said.
I see.
Luna waved her guards aside.
Very well, let us be off.
Her horn brightened and Caramel heard a loud pop. The next thing he knew, they were standing on a rocky tor out in the open. A mild breeze blew through his mane as he took stock of his surroundings. He thought he recognized a rock formation some distance off as the tunnel exit he had used nearly 2 days ago. As best as he could tell, it was late into the night. The stars and moon were out and twinkling in the sky.
Hammer, Anvil, keep watch for trouble,
said the princess. Both bat ponies nodded and took to the air, circling above. When they were high enough, she silently shot a small plume of blue magic into the sky. It burned brightly, but gradually waned until it dissipated entirely.
What was that for?
Caramel asked. Luna gestured at a low hill in the distance.
I have reserve troops hidden nearby. Had I not sent a signal within the next few minutes, they would have assumed the worst and taken action.
She then turned her gaze to a patch of drying green resin on the rock that they were standing on and inclined her head towards it.
They also assisted in carrying away prisoners as I extracted them from the hive.
Sash frowned.
So, this was supposed to be a rescue mission and not an invasion?
Indeed, confronting your queen was not a part of the plan.
Luna chuckled dryly.
Neither was the part where my guards got themselves cornered. We were supposed to incapacitate all changelings that we encountered, waking or otherwise, but your presence sent it all awry. I had not expected to find you, of all ponies, intruding into the dreams of the prisoners.
Just one more thing that I'm good at messing up. Woo-hoo.
The princess sat down and gestured for them to do the same. After they complied, she sighed and said,
Caramel? Do you consider yourself a pony or a changeling?
Huh?
The question caught him totally unprepared.
Can't I be both?
Luna gazed at him silently, and he suddenly felt a whole lot more self-conscious about his hybrid appearance. But his fear that she would find him disgusting proved unfounded. She seemed quite unfazed by his looks. In fact, she seemed more fascinated than unnerved, and he supposed that was to be expected, given her guard's appearances and her own alter ego.
Well, I do not see why not.
Luna's smile was mild and understanding, but her expression grew stern for a moment.
But your disappearance did cause quite a stir in Ponyville. Your friends were worried, and your parents were frantic. Did you not consider their feelings before running after a mare without so much as a goodbye?
I'm right here, you know,
Sash muttered.
She didn't ask for it,
Caramel hurriedly pointed out.
In fact, she told me not to, but I couldn't leave her. Sassaflash might not be a pony, but she is real, and she is my special somepony.
I can understand that, but did you really have to keep silent? Your friends eventually guessed and brought the matter to my sister, but the lack of information stayed her hoof for weeks. And when they finally decided to go searching for you on their own, they only got themselves captured. I found the remains of Miss Cherry's balloon on my way here.
Caramel went a little red.
I kind of pinky promised not to tell any pony.
Luna raised an eyebrow.
To whom did you make such a promise?
I don't think I can tell you.
Was it a changeling?
Well...
He shuffled his hooves nervously, then realized that he'd already given it away. Luna was showing the tiniest hint of a smirk. After sighing, he added,
Acorn Nut. That's his pony name anyway. I visited him in the dungeons. He gave me directions for the hive, but only after making me pinky promise not to tell anyone.
So he did know something after all. We suspected as much since he was amongst the last ones you spoke to,
Luna mused.
But did it not occur to you that the situation warranted a small stain on your honor for breaking that promise?
No pony breaks a pinky promise,
Caramel and Sash hastily said in unison. Princess Luna blinked.
Very well. In any case, at least I eventually did find you.
How did you do it?
Sash asked.
As Princess of the Night, it is my duty to guard the dreams of my subjects. I had hoped to find him in the dreamscape and ask him myself,
Luna explained. She looked at Caramel pointedly and continued,
But you were a special case. Tell me, did you have nightmares for the last few months?
Caramel remembered the shapeless figure that haunted his sleep, the writhing mass of shadow with a gaping mouth brimming with teeth. He shuddered at the memory of it chasing him night after night.
Yeah. Was that really you all the time?
In a manner of speaking. I can interact with the dreamer, but fear is a very common response when I touch mortal minds. It usually lessens with each encounter, whereupon most ponies are comfortable with my presence on the third or fourth attempt.
I'm pretty sure you were scary for way longer than that.
Luna nodded and pointed at his chitinous forelegs.
That probably had something to do with it. I have never interacted with a dreaming changeling, and your condition was interfering. Your mind was growing increasingly foreign to me even as I familiarized myself with it night by night. Even our most recent contact was disappointingly marred by this.
Caramel frowned, recalling the one-sided conversation and her silent, eerie presence in his dreams following that episode.
I could understand you just fine. Why didn't you tell me what you were planning? We probably could have avoided all of this.
Luna put a hoof to her chin.
Yes, we probably could have. Unfortunately, I had no way of knowing that, and there was scant proof of whether any information I gave you would be safe, regardless of your allegiance.
Her ears drooped a bit, and she gave him an apologetic look.
I am sorry. Your friends were missing, and I had to make do with the few options I had left. I could not determine your location through your dreams alone, but if you were to come into the direct line of sight of the moon, I could make an educated guess. When you eventually did, I sent my guards in as bait, and through their capture was able to locate the rest of the prisoners.
His eyes widened after he'd processed that.
Wait, you mean the moon idea was from you?
What moon idea?
Sash asked, eyes narrowed in suspicion.
I planted in his subconscious the notion that he would find assistance should he go to the surface on a moonlit night. I also ensured that he would be uncomfortable with the idea of divulging that information to any pony else.
Wait, you can actually do that?
Caramel sputtered. He scooted back several inches.
What's with leaders and their freaky mind control powers? What else did you leave in my head?
Sash held him close, and her touch helped to soothe his nerves. When he had calmed enough to return to his original spot, she shot a glare at the princess. Luna still looked apologetic, but there was a bit of steel in the way her mouth had set to a thin line as well.
Again, I am sorry, but I had to place the safe return of the others over your dignity. I assure you, such manipulation is not taken lightly by Celestia or myself, and I would not have attempted it were there other reliable options available.
I guess I could live with that,
Sash said after some thought. Caramel tentatively agreed. It would probably be selfish of him to think otherwise, especially since he was pretty much the reason Lucky and Cherryberry had gotten themselves caught.
I am curious about your condition,
Luna suddenly said.
How did it happen, and why were you subjected to it?
Caramel noticed Sash fidgeting a little at that remark.
Your Highness, I wouldn't really call it a condition. It's not a disease or anything.
Was it forced upon you?
Well, not really.
He scratched his head.
Chrysalis said she would let me be with Sash if I agreed to this. She even gave me a few chances to change my mind.
Did it hurt?
Caramel glanced at Sash, then turned back to Luna.
I have no regrets.
I see,
said Luna.
But what was the purpose behind your transformation? It looks incomplete.
Well, long story. Rax. Changeling, warrior, friend. Friends do not forget. Caramel and Sash told her about the state of the hive, about how they had to scrounge for food and fend off attacks from below. He told her about their flimsy agriculture and their shortage of love, and their reliance on the captives as their primary source of magic and means to defend themselves. The hive's population had shrunk to an unhealthily small number after the wedding attack, and they were hard-pressed to maintain and defend their home, but they could not leave because they had nowhere else to go. The princess asked questions every now and then, but for the most part she listened without interrupting. He also told Luna about how Chrysalis had planned to use him and Sash as a more stable source of love energy.
So, that's why I can't go back with you, Caramel concluded. My new family needs me around. But we can't do without the, captives either,
Sash emphasized.
Caramel and I aren't strong enough to feed the entire hive. If you take them away, we soon won't have enough energy to spare for magic. And we kind of need that to fight intruders and heal the wounded.
Princess Luna did not look happy to hear that.
That is unfortunate. But are you truly asking me to let them remain here? Just long enough for us to find alternatives. Please, Your Highness, let us keep them for a while longer. Once we are stable, we will let every pony go.
Does your feeding harm them? Sash shook her head.
No, not if we're careful. At worst, overfeeding gives them nightmares, but we're taught to control ourselves because bad dreams will make ponies take longer to recover for the next session.
Luna frowned and looked pointedly at Caramel.
Is this true?
He nodded tentatively.
As far as I know, I've been keeping an eye on Lucky and Cherry, and they looked fine up until today.
Would you stake your lives on their safety?
Yes, they said in unison. Luna's gaze intensified.
Even knowing that, should they be harmed by your hive, I will return to personally make known my feelings on the matter.
As she spoke, her mane began to writhe angrily, her eyes glowed, and wisps of black smoke rose from her coat. Caramel shrank back a little, but he forced himself to keep eye contact and nodded. Sash did the same. The princess held their gaze for several moments before she relented and sighed, returning to her normal appearance.
Very well. Then there is little more to discuss. But before we settle this, I must ask you once more, Caramel. Do you wish to stay here? You are still welcome back home, and I will ensure that Sassaflash has a place by your side as well. Your friends and family are waiting for you.
He placed a foreleg around Sash.
I'm sorry, Your Highness, but I have another family to take care of now. When things are better, I might be able to visit. But for now, I know that my place is here.
Luna was silent for a moment. After a while, she glanced at Sash and said,
My little pony, cherish this stallion of yours. There are few like him.
Sash laughed and nuzzled Caramel's cheek.
There are none like him.
He grinned sheepishly. But beneath his embarrassment at her public display of affection, he was also thrilled that Luna had called Sash a pony, even when she wasn't wearing a disguise, and her words hadn't sounded forced.
Maybe things are finally starting to look up.
Come now,
said Luna as she rose to all fours.
I must speak with Chrysalis. We have taken long enough as it is.
They went back into the hive on hoof, flanked by Luna's guards and tailed by several warriors who kept a healthy distance. Caramel could not sense hostility from anyone, which was a good thing, but he wasn't too keen on the suspicious looks that they were giving him. The remainders of the pods had been arranged neatly in rows outside the entrance, and he spotted Lucky and Cherry amongst them. But Luna had other matters foremost on her mind, and she headed down into the tunnel after telling the workers to keep an eye on them for the time being. When they were half the distance to the Queen's chambers, Luna spoke up.
Who was the young one who defended Chrysalis?
Oh,
That's Stickle.
And the other two who questioned me?
Might and Pith. Why do you ask?
Luna had a distant smile on her face.
They remind me of a colt and filly I know.
Oh.
It is amazing how children can put one's perspective in order, is it not? I sometimes wonder why it is that when we grow up, we shed so many qualities that we would benefit from retaining.
Caramel waited for her to elaborate, but she remained silent after that. He supposed it was true enough. Aside from Sash, the nymphs were the ones that had helped him to keep going when he'd sunk to his lowest in the hive. He wondered how things would turn out if a bunch of nymphs and foals were dumped in the same room, then snorted when he imagined the same being done to grown-ups. With all he'd seen, the kids were more likely to end up friends first, or at least not start a war.
She's got a point.
What else do you want?
Chrysalis asked when she saw them. Caramel detected a hint of resentment in her voice.
To discuss your future.
You already have your subjects back. Take them and leave. We'll survive. Somehow. It's been that way for a long time.
Luna sighed.
Caramel and Sassaflash have enlightened me. If your feeding does not harm them, I will allow you to keep my subjects for a while longer.
Chrysalis blinked in surprise, then frowned.
What's the catch?
Peace. Let us end our mutual animosity. I have been informed that you have your own form of agriculture and can subsist on physical food. I will provide your hive with supplies and perhaps even some land in a more fertile region. In return, you will stop abducting ponies and eventually free your current charges when the time is right.
Is that it?
Chrysalis sounded a little skeptical, as if the offer was too good to be true. Luna nodded.
Well, except for one thing. I will take the elderly home. Given their age and state, they cannot be of much value to you now. Allow them to depart from this world with dignity.
I can agree to that,
Chrysalis conceded.
Then, it is done. I will have my soldiers return those I had rescued.
To Caramel and Sash, Luna added,
Take good care of them. I will be watching.
Caramel nodded, and Sash bowed.
Got it, Your Highness.
The blue alicorn gave them a friendly smile and extended the same courtesy to Chrysalis.
Then I bid thee farewell. We shall keep in touch.
With that, Princess Luna and her guards teleported back to the surface in a flash of blue light. When they were gone, Caramel plopped his haunches on the floor and let his breath whoosh out.
What a day.
Tell me about it,
Sash replied. He heard slow steps, then felt a gentle hoof on his shoulder. He turned to look and blinked in surprise at Chrysalis. She had a little smile that was equal parts relief, pride, and genuine happiness. After a moment, her hoof went to Sash's shoulder as well.
Well done.
2 simple words that somehow carried the weight of an entire hive's gratitude. It made him a little giddy. But in the next moment, Chrysalis's hoof faltered and she turned and ambled off. Her steps were slow and her body swayed dangerously to either side, and Caramel realized just how weary she was. A couple of her personal guards rushed in to support her as she made for her private quarters. The rest of the changelings present, mostly overseers and a few warriors, soon left to mind their own businesses. The damage to the hive had to be repaired, and the pods had to be shifted back to their places. Before long, he and Sash were left alone in the Queen's chamber. Caramel had been feeling a strange tingling sensation after hearing Chrysalis's words. It was hauntingly familiar, like an old memory that was just out of reach. He thought he could hear something too, like the faint sound of a unicorn casting a spell.
Caramel?
Sash whispered. He saw her pointing a hoof at his flank and looked at it just in time to see the 3 blue horseshoes of his cutie mark glowing softly. A couple of seconds later, the horseshoes grew transparent and faded away to nothing, leaving his flank as bare as a foal's. He wasn't sure how long he spent staring at it, but by the time he finally said something, the sound that came out was,
You okay?
His cutie mark was gone. Though he had never really been appreciative of it, it was at least a part of him. It was something that no pony else in the world had, not even the princesses. Sure, being part changeling meant that he could just make it come back, but it wouldn't be real. He shouldn't have to pretend to be himself. He felt a gentle hoof on his shoulder as his vision clouded.
Caramel, I am so sorry,
he heard Sash whisper. 3 horseshoes going in a never-ending circle. Wandering. When he saw her sympathetic expression, he sniffled and tried to shrug it off, saying,
It's okay. I guess it just means I'm not a wanderer anymore. I finally know where I belong.
She sighed and gently wiped his tears away with a hoof, then hugged him tightly.
I love you, Caramel.
He smiled and nuzzled her back.
Love you too.